Well, thank you very much for the talk. As we have already started the discussion during the talk, I would say we can continue with the discussion.
One question regarding how you come to your data. So, so you actually take it out from publications or archaeological reports about excavations, and you have some points you always record. So whether it's the gender, the date of the grave, the objects, and you make your own typological.
In first instance,
I suppose I'm working with text, so it's totally strange word for me. So I think in different publications, maybe some jugs are called differently, or whether there's some typological question, and you say maybe in the publication it's written this way, but I as archaeologists say it's this type of vessel. How do you deal with that, or with uncertainty at all?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So that's a large part of the work is indeed going through the publications. The reason I have now also chopped up the different networks is indeed because of the typology problem. So luckily, people that publish are mostly consistent within their own typology, although you have to be critical to that, because I have found some errors or things that I think might be classified differently, because a more recent publication, for example, suggested something different. However, the very problem you refer to, I have encountered in the one other case study I include in my work, where there was a German archaeologist, a French archaeologist, and an Italian archaeologist, and they use completely different terminology and typology. So that's the one where I have to, let's say, write over the whole database and impose my own typology. A work for the future would be to make a regional typology that would make the integration of the data sets possible, which is now more difficult. And that's also one of the reasons that I use objects like fibula instead of saying bar fibula with a knot on the right side, because whether it's a fibula and has one or two, let's say, details, is important in terms of typology, but in the end what the fibula did was keeping the dress up. So by trying to include different levels of analysis and including the typology, I try to circumvent this problem.
So you also have a step of normalization, so to speak.
Yes. But using different levels, let's say, of normalization, I try to, let's say, verify whether the patterns I find make sense, or whether it's something I have imposed because of the data sets.
I have two easy questions. Actually, you had so many slides, wonderful slides, with so many informations. And I have two questions because I didn't understand so good the themes. One slide about religion as foundation of city life in ancient Greece. The question is, how do you mean that as foundation? And the second one is, you said about the Greek colonies that they transformed the societies dramatically. Also, in which way? Also in a bad or in a good way?
Yeah. Well, so your first question was, I presume, the book of Fustel de Coulanges, but that was 19th century. So late 19th century, that's what he proposed.
1864. And this was very special.
Yeah. But that's indeed, it's not my notion. It's I'm just referring to the book and to the questioning of the ancient city. So he was basically the first one to really critically, as you say, it is a special book, going over laws and so on, and the role of religion in the whole structure. But it is still quoted, and it is generally seen, at least in the field of archaeological urbanization, it is considered an important work for that. Then your second question, the transformation of the colonial cities. Yes, that was very dramatic in a sense that what archaeologists and historians proposed for a very long time was that the Greeks came in the 8th century, also 7th, but they came to Italy and they founded colonies, possibly killed off the natives. There's discussion about that. And installed cities. So the idea is that there were founders of the Greeks, so the leader of the Greek expedition called the oikist, and he would have literally drawn a line where the city was to be built and designated places for here comes a temple, here will be the houses, and here will be the necropolis, and so on. And that has been believed for a very, very long time. It is still believed by some people that this is how Greek colonization actually happened. But then archaeologists started excavating these Greek cities. We know from the text, so we have ancient texts saying, oh, so-and-so came to found the city here. Theocles was the first one, was the first Greek to found a city in Sicily, and so on. And because it was not studied archaeologically, people always believed what the written sources said. And then the archaeologists started excavating, and especially in the earliest layers of these cities, they found so many indigenous objects in almost every Greek city or supposed Greek city that now, even though there's a lot of discussion still, but let's say that everyone agrees that the native populations were not killed by the Greeks, but were very much integrated in some way or another in these cities. Discussion then is what is important, what was brought in by the Greeks, what was brought in by the natives. So that's very much what archaeologists are now trying to study in this context. What changed? What were the innovations brought by the Greeks? Wine drinking, so there was a dramatic change in material culture. New cups, basically new everything, new houses, the cities appear, so it's a coincidence of the Greeks and the cities that appears. That's also why they thought for a very long time that the Greeks were responsible. New ways of burying, the transferal of burial as a main context of commemoration in the indigenous societies, in the prehistorical societies, to temples as the area for competition between elites, as the place where you would dedicate your valuables. They used to be placed in the tombs, and then we see where the Greek cities are in place, that they are deposited in temple or cult sites, or at least there's a new way of behaving, which can be linked to things that happen in Greece. So that's one of the reasons that people think that the Greeks are responsible, of course. So, but it's a very complex field.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Maria asked some theoretical questions about your data. You linked graves with, did I understand, with types of objects in graves. Is it right?
Yes.
In my view, that is not a consistent model of data or relations. Normally, we would say there's a grave, it has some attributes that are the findings, which way. You can make typologies, it is repeated there and there, but relations means that there are two basic elements, and there's a relation between. And we have basic elements on a different level. Here we have graves, and then we have objects which appear, types of objects which appear in graves. That are different things. And it's an absolutely different level, and it produces strange graphics if you make relations between them.
Well, I'm sorry you find it strange. Well, for one thing, I'm definitely not the only one to use this kind of model. So there are more archaeologists using it, and there are also anthropologists moving in the way of using it.
Okay, but this is a question that many will do. What is the foundation? Is it a sound foundation? Can you use it logically or what?
Well, it is systematically applied, so all the objects are only linked to the tomb. So in this sense, the links are definitely, I didn't make it up, you know, I used the data and consistently went through all the tombs and all the objects they had. So it is a network of similarity, so it gives you a similarity index between the tombs and the frequency that objects appear in the tombs, or that some tombs are more important.
May I repeat, this is a network at all? Or is it just a network generated by computer graphics?
That is indeed a very good question. Is this a network? We can definitely apply network analysis to it, but is this a social network? That's why I referred to the community of practice. I don't think that the network itself is there, but we need to link it to what the people did around it. So let's say the meta-narrative of the deposition of these tombs.
But may I quote you? We nearly have no information, real information about the praxis.
No. But we still ask these questions. That's the whole point of archaeology.
But, okay, you can ask questions.
No, well, unless you do archaeology in the sense we are going to describe the monuments, which is of course a valid way of doing archaeology, but archaeologists also ask questions about what these societies did. Even though we have no written sources, we try to write history, the social history and economic history.
Of course, that's right, but there are limitations.
Of course.
The world of the graves is a very special world. That's not the world of the living. That's a separated.
Yes.
And it's even physically separated. As you told it about the Greek polis, what happened is absolutely unbelievable that there were no rich people in the later phase. But they buried their deaths in a different way, and that depended to anything, okay? But the changing practices are so, but it doesn't simply depict the social reality. That's a special world.
No, of course. It is thought that in the archaic period there were sumptuous laws, so that rich people were not.
We have none of them.
No.
Which we have from later times.
Yes. Yeah. No. It is a problem. It is absolutely right. But that is what archaeologists believe, because we can only go as far as our evidence and assume what was going on. These are still questions we ask, and that's the whole point of using theory and using different kinds of analysis, is try to make informed. I'm convinced that it's always subjective. Everything that an archaeologist says is subjective. It is an interpretation of patterns, but what we need to do is try to be clear about which theory we use, why we use it, what we aim to demonstrate, and what the data are that we use. And then we can make indeed a subjective reading of what we think these social and economic and historical processes that were going on. Will it be confirmed? Well, if someone thinks that my hypothesis might be right, then we have a consensus, and that is how consensuses exist in archaeology. That's the reason that archaeologists assume that there were sumptuous laws in the archaic period, because we don't find rich tombs in the archaic period. Well, I would, if you know rich tombs of the archaic period, I would like to know where. I don't know every archaeological site that has ever been excavated, so it might be that there are rich tombs I don't know anything about. Actually, in the Black Sea, I can think of some rich tombs, but that is a completely different context, because that has very much to do with the natives. So there's a lot of discussion about to what extent these were Greeks, to what extent these were natives. But it is thought that elite competition in the archaic period was played out in the temples, in the cults, so that people would invest their money in dedicating a statue or dedicating jewelry in these new contexts of rite, of competition, of display, rather than putting the objects in the tombs, because we don't find any rich tombs of this period. And that's a marked difference between the Greek cities and the Etruscan cities, where burial remained the most important context. They had temples, even in the 8th century, but they were not as monumental, so there was not as much money invested in them as there was in the tombs. I refer to the tomb at Tarquinia, Cerveteri. These were all these people's wealth put in the commemoration of their deceased relatives. So it is true, it's not a one-to-one relation, but the fact that people invest wealth in something to make it durable, even for when all of them are dead, at least for me, that is a good reason to assume that that was a context that was valued by these people more than building a rich house, for example, because we hardly have any of that time. So presumably that...
Do you have any houses at all?
A few, yes.
But we can make an image about the complete settlement. We can say there are many, few. We have no percentages.
No. No. So that's future research is hopefully going to shed light, but the problem is that some of these cities have been inhabited ever since. So it's extremely difficult to study these earlier layers. So yeah, it would be ideal to have these contexts and be able to compare them, but in absence we have to work with the data we have. So. But the houses we have, and the assumption is that these were quite simple huts, so built of perishable material, with the introduction in the 7th century BC of roof tiles for richer, so it happens in a later period that people start paying more attention to living in a nice house and having richly furnished rooms and things like that. It's an open question, so.
More questions?
Just one simple question on the data sets that you used. How did you acquire them? Were they kind of open in some kind of way?
Yes.
Did you use any particular platform to acquire them, or any special format, or how did you get the data, and did you have to do some like technical transformations to work with them?
So they are published data in a traditional archaeological way, in the sense that these are just lists of, we have found this tomb and this and this and this object was in it, and the object looked like this, and then they give they characterize the object, whether it was bronze fibula or an iron fibula or things like that. So I have digitized the data sets myself. They're old excavations. Not all data sets are very good quality, so more work, as I said, on typology, also on data, on the chronology, ideally should be done. I'm trying to do some of it myself, but yeah, it's very time consuming, also very difficult to rework, because excavations that were done 100 years ago, people weren't interested in the shape of the tombs. They just wanted to find very nice vessels, and they didn't look at all the other things. So that's quite a problem sometimes. So tombs with really no reliable information, regretfully, I've had to discard them. So when I really said this is an incomplete data set, we're sure it's incomplete, I just didn't use it in the analysis. So that's regretfully very little we can do about that.
I have a question as well, regarding the data as well. Normally you publish, or I think your way of publishing is writing a book, using your data set. Now, what happens with your data set? Will it remain on your computer, on your private computer, or is there any possibility to publish as well this data set, as well as being compatible with other software or other network analysis tools, for example, which I think might be a little bit difficult, but it can be converted. And then as well the long-term preservation of these data sets. Are there any thoughts in the direction? But what are your...
Yeah, that's an excellent question. For my project now, I have no intention of publishing the raw data for the simple fact that that require a lot of additional work. However, because I have collected a huge amount of data, I hope to do a data dedicated project afterwards. So I want to look for funding to publish these data in an accessible to the public database they can query and they can use for other analysis, be it simple quantification or network analysis. The data is quite clearly structured, so another person could easily query my database, assume that they understand Italian because I've not yet translated all the entries. They could easily use it in another network analysis program, so that wouldn't really be a problem. The communication between databases, archaeological databases, is a huge problem because we don't have any standards that were formulated yet. I know they are working on standards, trying to publish standards for archaeological survey, how to publish archaeological survey, how to preserve the metadata of the collection of the data with the aim of enabling the communication between databases in the future. Another project has been dedicated to mining different databases, but that I've heard from an insider was only moderately successful simply because of the fact that everyone makes his or her own database. So that's certainly something we should aim at to, well, collect more data, because in the end, if we really want to say something new about the past, about the deep past we have no written sources about, I think we need to collect as much material data as we can and query them and apply analysis to them, revisiting our old questions. We can say nothing about ancient economy, especially earlier periods, because we have no quantities at all. Very often for most archaeological excavations, we don't even know how many objects of the one against how many objects of the other they had. So people make very uninformed hypotheses, or they draw conclusions without actually having quantified or having specified the material patterns of what is going on, and that's very much what I'm trying to do. So a lot of work, of course. So.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much for the lively discussion.